What's up, guys? It's Chili here. I am doing a rework design concept for the House of Lancaster. My mic setup and my recording setup is completely different from normal, so excuse me if there's any issues with either the resolution or the mic quality. I'm still traveling right now for work, so it's a little bit of a weird situation. One of the things I'll point out, though, is that while I'm traveling for work, I've been playing House of Lancaster, streaming with my desktop at home, and using my laptop trackpad, and I'm still able to get wins. It's kind of ridiculous how brain dead this civilization is. And at this point, the DLC civs have been out for a few weeks now, and everyone's been trying them out. There's no longer as much of a bluster about the balance of, especially of House Lancaster, as it was in the beginning. I still think there are a lot of core issues, though. So I want to point out this is a rework talking about the design of the civilization, not about the balance. So the balance could be good. It could even be underpowered or whatever. I don't really care about that. What I care about is how does it feel to play and how does this feel in the long term? And I have to say, House of Lancaster is not looking too good, in my opinion. In many ways, it doesn't feel like an AoE 4 civ. So let me jump into some of the comments I've made here already. You might have seen some of this on Reddit. I'm going to go ahead and get into more detail with this video and just kind of tell you guys what my design philosophy is here. So first off, what's wrong with House of Lancaster? House of Lancaster is an unfun civilization, not just balance-wise, but design-wise. In many ways, it feels more like an AoE 3 civ than an AoE 4 civ. It's got unraidable manors with passive resource generation, lack of opponent interaction, turtling while booming, and overtuned units and abilities that are all features that plague this civ. Many of these things don't even belong in any RTS period, let alone AoE 4. And just to emphasize, design is not the same thing as balance. You can have a balanced faction and still have a bad design. And I'm purely commenting on design here. So for my design philosophy, I'm hoping that the devs can consider reworking the civ, and I'm hoping that if they do, they can feel free to take any ideas from this video or from this rework online. This rework updates House of Lancaster to bring it in line with AoE 4 civ design principles while also not deviating too much from the original design. I wanted to stay true to what the devs already did with House of Lancaster and just use that as the grounding for this redesign. I also plan on staying true to the 1-star difficulty rating of the civ. I think the devs, when they were trying to make this, they wanted to make House of Lancaster a really easy to play civ because it is the English variant, and the English variant is in English are basically one of the starter civs for the game. So it makes a ton of sense to keep this 1 star. I might even shave off some of the more complicated aspects of the civ design, and we'll jump into it and kind of see what I mean. So first thing, of course, is the problem that everyone's been groaning about. The problem with Manors. A lot of you guys have already kind of pointed out on the forums what's the issue with Manors. I want to talk about that first off, because that you can't address House of Lancaster without first addressing the Manors. So unlike every other passive generation in AoE 4, there's no risk reward with Manors. You can build them in a tight defensive location so that there's almost nothing your opponent can do to stop your mana boom. So for context, some comparisons you can think about are like the Malians, for instance. When they build the pit mines, they have to build it out on the gold on the map. So it means that they always have to kind of expand their presence over the course of the game and cover more and more of the map. Same thing goes for like the Roost hunting cabins. The hunting cabins can't be placed next to each other, otherwise they don't generate as many resources, so that you have to spread them out in order to get that gold generation. This is toxic. So for context, Manors, you don't have to do that. You can build them any location that you like, and you can build them as tight and compact and defensible as you like, and they generate a crap ton of resources for you. So there's very little things that the opponent can do to stop that kind of resource generation. So this is toxic for a strategy game like AoE 4, as there's no room for interaction or counterplay. In the late game, the Lancaster economy is virtually unraidable. On top of that, Manors open up a huge amount of pop space for military spam, similar to Mali. The difference is Mali's units have weaker stats to compensate, while Lancasters have both more military pop space and more powerful units. So a lot of you guys will know that Mali, they don't have the Knight, for instance. They have the Sofa, which is almost like a medium Knight hybrid. And then they don't have Men-at-Arms. They have the Musafati Warrior, which is not an armored unit. So for a lot of Mali's units, they're actually relatively low quality. They don't have high stats, and and they have to make up for that by having more units on the field. For House of Lancaster, though, they have crossbowmen, they have men-at-arms, they have knights, and you can spam them out the wazoo. Plus, on top of that, their units are even upgraded compared to their normal versions. You have better men-at-arms, you have better knights, you have demi-lancers and everything. So there's a lot of core problems with this design in the late game, because as a result, you can have a 150 military pop army and the enemy only has less than 100 because they need to sustain their economy. And the other thing I want to call out here is that when it comes to counterplay here, a lot of people will say like, oh yeah, you can just ram rush the Lancasters. The thing is, you can kind of ram rush any civ in the game. Essentially, a ram rush is almost like an all-in this game. And if the only option to defeating the Lancaster Manors is to all-in them in the early game, that just seems like a very limiting factor. You're kind of limited on the number of strategies here. Also, I want to point out that like, for pro games, like maybe there's other options, but pro games are playing on a different level. I'm talking about the vast majority of players on the ladder. They're not going to be experiencing the same games that pro players are going to be able to experience. They're not going to be able to play around with some of the intricacies of this civ design. Ram Rush, I don't think is viable, like the one option for counterplay, and at the same time there's also nothing that you can do to raid the manors. Essentially, House of Lancaster, even if you raid their villagers, their manors are still pumping, and the manors have so much pop, so by default the manors are at 750 health, and then you can upgrade them with another 500 health from the House of Lancaster castle landmark, and then you get another 200 and then 300 health from the tech upgrades. So you get 1750 health in the late game for the manors, which is not even in the late game. You get that by the end of the feudal age, because you get all your techs and you get your castle landmark up. So it's kind of ridiculous. Like, you can't raid a building with that much health easily, and you essentially have to all in order to actually interact with the manors. Otherwise, they just stay put, and there's nothing you can do to the Lancaster economy. We had that beastie game where like I think it was Puppy Paw or someone, was it Wham or Puppy Paw? But like he had like all of his villagers raided, but he was still pumping out ridiculous numbers of units just from the manors alone. So how are we going to rework the manors? Let me explain to you at least what I think would make a lot of sense. First off, obviously, is you need to make the manors be played out on the map. You can't just have them be compacted in like a really tight defensive area, which is almost like what the current design encourages with the Lancaster Castle's influence buff. So first off, manors now function as universal drop-offs. So this means you can put your manor on your gold, on your wood, on your deer, and you can drop off resources there. This is partly historically motivated, because historically manors were basically like a central house or castle type of building that kind of oversaw all the peasants nearby. And it makes sense that the peasants kind of drop their resources almost like a tax into the manor. On top of that, I added this influence mechanic called Manor Lords. So instead of the Lancaster Castle getting the influence buff, the manors themselves will now generate influence. And I took a very similar approach with how the Lancaster Castle works. And I kind of moved it over here to this influence. Manors now project an influence zone of 2, and each building placed in this influence grants plus 50 HP to the manor. And this includes farms. So remember, manors are now able to be universal drop-offs, which means you can build farms around them. On top of that, because of this influence mechanic, when you build a manor, you're investing a lot of resources. It's going to be passively generating resources, but you want to be able to defend it easily, right? Well, if it only has 750 health, it's the same health of a house. It's going to be pretty prone to raiding, especially if you're building it out on the map. But if you build a lot of buildings around it, let's say you build a bunch of farms around it, you could easily get up to another 500 health on top of this, so that you can have your manor sitting at around like 1250 health or something like that. This basically encourages you to build your manors, and it will get more and more defensive over time as you add more and more buildings into the manor influence. Another way to think about this is like when you first place your manor, it is very vulnerable. It gets a lot of resources sunk in, and it's not a lot of health. But as your civilization kind of grows and evolves, or as you kind of build out that location, then your manor gets stronger over time. And in that sense, there's more interactivity with the opponent. The opponent can choose to raid you early on when you're first placing down that manor, and they'll have a harder time raiding you in the later game when you have more buildings built around it. The other thing I want to add here is this kind of limiting factor. So this is something I couldn't really decide on, and it kind of depends on the design philosophy with this civ. And you can go either way, I think. The first option is to use Manors to ramp your economy, and the second option is to use Manors to cement your economy. So what I wrote here is for the ramping system is Manors would work similar to cisterns. So you have no limit on the number of Manors you can make. At least rather you can make 9 Manors or 10 Manors or whatever, and there's no like direct limit on how many Manors you can make there, but the Manors cannot be built within the same influence zone, similar to the Byzantine cisterns. So this basically forces you to spread out the Manors. It's a very like what's the word? Like a very almost like artificial design element. So I'm not like super a fan of that because I'd rather encourage people to place the Manors out in a more natural way. But at the same time, the cisterns work for the Byzantines. Why not just adopt that same system over here? So now if you have 2 Manors and they have overlapping influences, they basically have to be built like, if you had 1 Manor here, your next Manor would have to be built like out here or something like that. So that way the influence doesn't overlap. It's just a good way to force out the Manors to be spread out. And this works if you have a ramping style, if Manors are used for ramping, because if you're ramping your economy, that's really powerful. And you want to be able to basically limit the amount of ramp that the Lancasters can do without taking some risk and reward. So because they're being spaced out, there's going to be more risk to the ramp, essentially. The second option is for cementing. So what this means is like, at least for the buff here I have, is Manors can be built anywhere, so they no longer have this like influence restriction zone like the cisterns, but you only unlock 1 Manor slot for every 10 vills you currently have. So imagine if you only have like 20 vills in the feudal age or something like that, you essentially can build 2 Manors, and you unlock additional Manor slots as you build more vills. So in this sense, Manors are kind of a way to prevent you from losing too much when you get raided. Normally when you get raided with your vills, you have to rebuild all your vills. For Manors, you still have to build those vills, so that way you do get your economy up to that level. You build a Manor and it doesn't boost you that much because you only get 1 Manor for every 10 vills, so it's not really used to ramp your economy, but rather now that you have the Manor, even if you get raided, your Manors are still producing. And even if you had, let's say you get to 100 vills and you get 10 Manors out on the field, and then you lose half of your vills, well, those 10 Manors are still producing resources. So in that case, you can kind of use this as a way to cement the economy. Like it basically makes your economy more and more defensible, or more and more impervious to raids. So that's the second option. And this is a very powerful option in the late game. Obviously, like if you have a very unraidable economy in the late game, that's not going to be super fun, but it also takes time to kind of develop this. So this is kind of the way you're thinking about this is like, how do I invest in the long term? And that's what this philosophy is like. So I'll just read over some of the notes I have here as well. I think I already covered most of it. In the old system, Manors were built in tight packs. Not only was this an eyesore, oh yeah, that's the other good point, is that like the Manors all kind of being built right next to each other, next to Lancaster Castle, made no sense because Manors historically were surrounded by open fields and they basically controlled a big farm, like manorialism and like feudalism. That's like the whole thing. But instead, now we have like a bunch of Manors that just kind of like are giant houses sitting in a neighborhood around the castle, which just doesn't make any sense for how Manors should be working. They're also too easily defensible because of this. Changing Manors to be universal drop-offs is one way to incentivize placement near resources in a more natural way. Okay, we mentioned that earlier. The new influence system also encourages smart base building to buff up your Manor's health. A fully built-out Manor in the new system receives about 400 to 500 bonus health. In contrast, the old influence system immediately granted 500 health, and then researching the Manor text bumped it up to 1000 bonus health, making these things basically unkillable for very little work. Yeah, that was the other thing, is that like the Manors were basically unkillable and you didn't have to do too much. You just put it in the influence, you just research the text, and that's basically it. Whereas now you have to kind of be smart about your base building, and like it encourages you to actually like engage with the game as a player a little bit more. So that's why I like the this like Manor influence mechanic. I'm calling it Manor Lords. Also, shout out to the game Manor Lords, of course. Really, really good game if you guys are a fan of single player base building games. Additionally, options A and B present a kind of limiting factor that I couldn't decide between. So you have option A, which treats manors as more of a way to ramp your economy. And since ramping is so powerful, it's important to introduce more risk. So that's why the cisterns mechanic forces the players to space out their base more. Option B treats manors as a way to cement their economy. You still need to build your eco, but the manor is a way to boost it. Since manors are added slowly over time, there's less of a need to force manors to be spaced out. Exactly. Regardless, these changes make manors more interactive and fun, and they're now a way to augment the economy rather than forego a traditional villager economy. Lancasters are more raidable and interactive as an opponent, while also simultaneously being more strategic to build out as a player. So hopefully you guys agree with some of my design assessments here. Another thing I want to point out here is that, like, yeah, a lot of times people would they would do the 9 manor boom and they would forgo like a second TC, for instance, because you can only choose one or the other. So in a way, building the manors kind of cannibalizes your strategic decisions for going for a second TC. So rather than like adding to the game, it just kind of like takes away from other elements of the game, which seems like a weird mechanic to add. I almost wonder if like they should have just like replaced the second TC with the manors. Like, don't even allow this civilization to build more TCs or something like that. Just because like it feels like there's some redundancy there, and very unoften would I see any Lancaster players seriously going for multiple TCs while also going for Manor Boom at the same time, because those two directions kind of contradict each other. Just to read out these little notes I have here: since manors benefit from nearby structures and function as drop-offs, building farms around the manors is a natural combination and historically fitting. Yeah, so you can imagine a bunch of farmers around this, a bunch of farms placed around this building right here, and it'd be kind of similar to how the English have a bunch of farms placed around their mills, right? By default, the manor has the same health as a house, making it easier to raid when it hasn't been fully, quote-unquote, established yet. So yeah, this is what I mentioned earlier. In the beginning, it's very weak, but as you establish more buildings around the manor, it gets tankier and tankier, so it'll survive a lot better. And then each building in the manor influence provides the manor with bonus health. So that's what you see with these little like icons here. And this wouldn't be an influence that kind of like expands outward. It would just be like limited to this particular radius right there. Oh yeah, here's a picture of like the manors looking really ugly. Like, what is this base? Like, this is no shade to the player here, but it's just like, it just looks really ugly, having your base laid out in this giant like neighborhood like this, and it doesn't reflect the historical inspiration of manors at all. All right, moving on. My point number 2 is that a house unified should be an aura. So House Unified is a buff that the Lancasters have. It currently gives +1 damage per standing keep to Demi-Lancers and Earl's Guards. So these are 2 of the unique units for the House of Lancaster. This buff seems to replace the, the Network of Castles buff that the English normally have. And for those folks that don't remember, the Network of Castles basically gives an aura around your towers, TCs, and your keeps, and gives a 20% attack speed buff to all of your nearby units. And it's really fun because it allows the opponent to interact with the buff. The opponent can see where that buff is, and they can choose to engage with you there, or they can choose to try to siege down your keep or your tower first before they choose to engage with you. And as the English player, you also have to like think about like, where do I want to take my fights? How do I want to build out like more and more towers on the map, so that way I can take these very favorable fights with this +20% attack speed. In comparison, the House Unified is just kind of an invisible number. So it's really difficult to keep track of, because it basically just gives you +1 damage per standing keep. So if you have like just 1 keep, it just gives you +1 damage for these units. If you have like 6 keeps, then it gives you like +6 damage. But that's like not that impactful of an ability, and it's just like hovering over the entire game. So as an opponent, you're never really going to be thinking about when you're getting this buff, and even as the player, you're not really going to be thinking about like when you have this buff. It's just not fun. It's not engaging. There's nothing you can do with this buff, and there's very little you can do to counterplay it. Like, the only counterplay here is you have to destroy the keep. So like, yeah, sure, you destroy a keep, but like destroying a keep is so much effort, and like there's essentially there's no real way to feel any engagement out of this ability. It's not as the player, you don't feel the benefit, and as the opponent, you can't do anything about it. So no one gets any fun out of this ability. So that's my biggest issue with it. So how would I rework it? Well, for House Unified, I'm making it so that it's now an aura that emanates from the keep, and you can see that aura right here. That's what this little like ring right here is. It grants a flat 5+5 bonus health to nearby units, and each additional keep stacks +5 health at a max of 25 health. So I kept the similar stacking keep mechanic, which is what they wanted to do with the original +1 damage, but I changed it to bonus health. I'll tell you why. The reason why I'm adding bonus health to this civilization is because it's very much taking inspiration from the Lords of Lancaster ability. The Lords of Lancaster are another unique unit for the House of Lancaster. You can build 4 of them, and they stack +5 health percentage to the max health of all nearby units. Now, health percentage is a little bit weird, and it doesn't super synergize well with this civilization, whereas I think flat health is really interesting. So this civ, it builds a lot of really cheap weak units like the yeoman and spearmen. Those are some of their strongest units, and most of the times in the House of Lancaster you'll see them just kind of spamming these 2 units in particular. By giving the keeps flat bonus health, you basically are able to augment the health of all of your cheap trash units and make them a really tanky defensive powerhouse. And it fits with the kind of defensive vibe that this civ is going for. Of course, I'm also removing the percentage health bonus from the Lords of Lancaster, and I'll get into that a little bit later. The effect would look visually similar to the Network of Castles, but with the Lancaster rose icon. That's this rose icon right here. And of course, like I just did a demonstration graphic here. This isn't necessarily meant to represent what it actually looks like in game. I'm sure the artists in the game can come up with a much better job than I did. Each keep adds an additional crown to the crest and is visible to the opponent. So you see all these crowns. Each time you add an additional keep to the field, you get an additional crown up to a maximum of 5 crowns. So this way, if I'm an opponent, I can look at this and be like, oh, if I fight under this keep, there's going to be plus 25 health for all of these little trash units in here. That's going to be really unfavorable to me. So now I have to interact with this keep in an interesting way. Either I have to attack somewhere else on the map, or I have to siege this keep down, or I goad the Lancaster army to attack into my base or something like that. The Lord of Lancaster will also contribute to a House Unified and now functions as a mobile emanator of the buff. So this is one of the fun things that I was thinking about, is like the keeps allow you to get this +5 health buff, but the keeps are, first of all, you're not going to have that many keeps, and second of all, you're basically restricted to being in your base then. So unlike the English, where the English you can build the forward outposts in order to bring your Network of Castles buff to the front lines, you can't really do that with the House of Lancaster. So the way that the House of Lancaster brings their buff to the front lines is using the Lords of Lancaster. And similar to how they work right now, they still give that kind of aura buff, only they're now giving the House of House Unified, so this like flat health bonus buff, directly to the front line rather than doing this like +5 health percentage thing. So I feel like there's a lot of natural synergies here that work well with the identity that already the Civ is kind of going for. Last thing, I'll just read the notes real quick. This rework aims to make a House Unified feel much more strategic and impactful. The flat bonus health synergizes perfectly with Lancaster's proclivity towards massing low health trash units like Spear and Archer. Opponents can now play around it by avoiding keeps or sieging them down. Cool. So that's exactly everything I just mentioned. And yeah, aura effect is similar to the Network of Castles. Not only does it does not ring bells, and it does not require enemy units to be nearby. So that's one thing about the Network of Castles, is that you have to have enemy units nearby for the bells to ring and give you that effect. It almost always happens, so you never really think about it. But just one thing to keep in mind here: the Lancasters also currently spawn 3 Earl's Guard each time a keep is built, and this feels really tacked on. I don't know if you can see the Earl's Guard here. This is like the silhouette of the Earl's Guard right here. But every single time you build a keep, it like spawns those Earl's Guard. Oh, here's another one right there. And you don't super feel that strength, and it feels really tacked on and weird. It feels like they like just adding a last minute balance thing here. But I don't really have strong opinions on it. I don't know if it should be removed or not. I'm just going to not comment on that for now. Each crown signifies an additional +5 health stack to the House Unified. Yeah, so that's exactly what this UI is meant to do right here. Cool. Yeah, and yeah, as the player now, you know like where the best line of scrimmage is for you, and as the opponent, you know how to play around that as well. I think this could be a really fun ability. I feel like this is one of the things I like the most about this rework, actually. And lastly, I'm starting to lose my voice. I want to get into units, text, and landmarks, because I'm going to make quite a few significant changes. I'm not going to, I think I won't read everything here because this is quite a lot of text, but I'll kind of go over the main points here. So first off, I want to point out this. The Lord of Lancaster, I mentioned earlier that instead of granting +5 max health, the Lord is now a walking emanator of that House Unified flat health buff I mentioned earlier. Each keep stacks an additional House Unified buff and each lord stacks an additional House Unified buff, up to a maximum of plus 25 health, of course. The other change I'm making here is that it can only be built from the Wingard Palace. And I'll tell you what I'm thinking here. So this is going to be really interesting. I'm making a huge change to the Wingard Palace. Instead of producing all these like battalions that have like a massive amount of value, right now with the House of Lancaster, Wingard Palace is like way overtuned. You almost always build it, and it just produces so many units at such a cheap price that you're basically trolling if you don't build this thing and get as much value as you can out of it. I'm changing that. With Wingard Palace now, I want to think of it as like a place to get special units. So the first thing is like the Lords of Lancaster will now spawn from the Wingard Palace. You still have a limit of 4, and each Lord will also provide that House Unified buff. I essentially think of them working as very similar to how they work right now. They're a kind of heavy men-at-arms unit. Maybe they get some additional buffs or something like that because they're coming out of a Age 4 landmark. The other thing I'm going to point out here is this Warwolf unit. So spawns a single massive unique trebuchet, and you're limited to just one. So today, the Warwolf it's called Warwolf Trebuchet, and it's a tech that you can get from the King's College landmark. And it makes your trebuchets a little bit bigger. And it doesn't feel super impactful, and you almost rarely get that tech right now. I'm changing it so that now the Warwolf is a unique unit. It's just called the Warwolf, and there's only one. So historically, the Warwolf was built as the largest trebuchet in world history. And it was built to prove a point at, I think it was Stirling Castle or something like that, the Siege of Stirling Castle. They built it, and then the castle garrison actually surrendered before they could use it. And then Edward Longshanks, the king, he basically insisted on using it at least once just to kind of demonstrate how powerful it is. And it took them months to build this thing. So the way the Warwolf works now is it is a single massive trebuchet. It has extremely high health, extremely high setup time, and a very slow movement speed. So you have to get it into position, you have to set it up. But once you do set it up, it has a very long range with a unique ability called Barrage, or maybe this can be called Bombardment or something like that. But what you do is you target an area on the map, and you can target in the fog of war. And it's kind of like an artillery ability. Think about it like fixed artillery from Company of Heroes, where you can target an area, and it will just repeatedly attack that area with a bunch of with a barrage of boulders. It'll damage units and buildings alike, probably do more damage to buildings, and it's a way to kind of like essentially cast artillery on the opponent. 1 second. Sorry about that. I'm in the hotel right now. Yeah, and the last thing is that this unit can only be built from the Wingard Palace, so it's limited to one. So if you want the Lords of Lancaster, if you want the Warwolf, you have to build the Wingard Palace. The other two battalions here are similar to before. One is called the Hobblar Battalion, which spawns a batch of Hobblars, and you might be wondering why Hobblars are spawning from the Wingard Palace instead of Demi-Lancers. I'm gonna get into that in a moment. And the other one is the Rebaldequin contingent, which spawns 2 Rebaldequins. I think previously this was called the Gunpowder contingent, and it also spawned a Culverin. I just kind of reduced it down so that like this building basically specifically builds unique units that you can't get otherwise. And Rebaldequins are only spawnable from the Wingard for the House of Lancaster, so I kept that in. Now Hobblars, let's talk about that. So Hobblars normally function as the horsemen for the House of Lancaster, and you might be wondering why they are in this Wingard Palace, because they're not necessarily like limited to landmarks like this. Well, I'm making a pretty massive change. So for the cavalry, I'm going to read this out loud here. Hobblars and Demi-Lancers will switch roles in this new rework. So Hobblars historically were Irish mercenaries, and their new role makes them a shipment-based raider cavalry. This lessens the power of the Lancaster Castle, where you can kind of summon like 11 Demi-Lancers and just like destroy everything on the map, because Demi-Lancers are too good at the general purpose role. Hobblars instead will be kind of like a raider specific kind of role. So I think it'll be a little bit more balanced when they get sent out. And just to comment again, I'm not talking about balance, just like there's less things you can do with Hobblars compared to Demi-Lancers. Demi-Lancers will now become the horsemen of this faction. Demi-Lancers in-game are almost the exact opposite of what Demi-Lancers were in history. So rather than being highly armored with minimal attack, the historical Demi-Lancers were lightly armored but carried a powerful lance. This new rework creates a more interesting horseman archetype. So let's get into what exactly that all means. So I'll start with the Demi-Lancer here. It now replaces the horseman, and it costs a little bit more wood. has the same attack and health as a horseman, so the stats are kind of tuned to match the horseman, but has one additional melee armor. So it still has a little bit more armor than a regular horseman. But unlike horsemen, Demi Lancers do not have bonus damage versus ranged units. Instead, they do a high damage knight level charge, and they can charge more often. Additionally, this unit model should use a regular horseman type horse. They should not have these heavily barded horses. Yeah, so it's the weirdest thing ever. When I first saw the Demi Lancers, I was like, what the fuck? That's not what a Demi Lancer looks like. Demi Lancers historically were guys on horses with giant lances, and they wore some body armor, but maybe only like the front side of their body was armored, and then their horses were completely unarmored because they needed that speed. The Demi Lancer role exists as a way to get a faster kind of Lancer out there without having all the heavy armor kind of slowing them down. They often rode horses that were faster instead of just like being really good at heavy charging instead as well. This rework kind of like takes that as inspiration, and it gives you an interesting way to think about the horsemen, because horsemen traditionally are mainly used as archer counters, especially in the early game. And now you can think of them, Demi Lancers, as being a little bit more versatile. They don't have any bonus damage versus range units, which means that this civilization in the feudal age has to play around how to counter archers in the early game. Obviously, they have the yeomen for that, so there are places where like things can be balanced. But the fact that the Demi Lancers do a knight level charge amount of damage, and they can charge more often, means that they're a very hit and run kind of unit. They're not as durable as a knight. They're relatively fragile, kind of like regular horsemen, and the fact that they can charge often and they can move fast means you kind of weave in and out, and it makes you play this civilization much differently. And I think that's going to be a lot more interesting than how we see Demi Lancers today. Hobilars are also going to be different now. They can only be trained from landmarks now. So kind of like the Demi Lancers before, Hobilars are now specifically trained from landmarks. They take on the role that Demi Lancers previously occupied. They have high ranged armor, just like right now. I think Hobilars have like 4 ranged armor in the feudal age or something like that, and no melee armor. So this is the same as before. That high range armor is kind of ridiculous. And right now they're almost like a super specialized anti-range unit. Which feels a little bit weird and redundant, and as a result, you don't really build Hobilars ever. And I'm changing them to now no longer have bonus damage versus range units. So this is also not an anti-range unit, but instead it has bonus damage versus villagers, buildings, and siege. So it is a raider unit. You essentially get a shipment of these guys, kind of like the same way the Lancaster Castle worked before. You get a shipment of them, they come out, and then you send them out to go raid, rather than sending them out to go do battles or like fight on the front lines, or like even delay on the front lines. The Hobilars are going to be very weak for that. They're still very fragile, but they're kind of used as being like a nuisance to the enemy. And it kind of fits how Hobilars were used historically. They were kind of like scouts that would kind of like be sent out to go do some raids on the sides, rather than being kind of like the frontline cavalry. And right now in game, they're almost used as frontline cavalry. You essentially spam a crap ton of Hobilars like Zergs and as like Zerglings, and you kind of send them out, which just doesn't really fit the identity of the historical Hobilar. So I feel like this rework kind of moves in a better direction thematically. Additionally, for this, I am removing the hill training tech, since hill training previously made Hobilars train a lot faster, and they give them bonus charge damage. So moving that because you're no longer training Hobilars anymore. I'm replacing them with a new ability, a new tech that I'm really excited about, called A Size of Arms. And this is going to be really fun. But I'm trying to think about how I should describe this. I'll finish the cavalry first, actually. I want to call it the Collar of Esses. So Collar of Esses previously gave Demi Lancers and Knights anti-armor damage, but there was no visual cue. So they were still swinging the same swords, but they had +6 anti-armor damage, and you just couldn't tell as the opponent whether or not you were fighting knights that were buffed up or not. So I thought this was a pretty toxic design and didn't make a lot of sense, because every other unit in the game, if they do deal anti-armor damage, they have like a weapon that kind of signifies that they're dealing anti-armor damage. An example would be the Ghazi Raiders. They were using a mace. Another example is the HRE Men-at-Arms. When you get the mace upgrade, they get bonus damage versus armor, but you can visually see the mace that they're carrying in their hand. So now you know that they have bonus damage versus armor. So one way you can solve this is you give the units like a mace or something like that, which is a okay way to solve it. But at the same time, it doesn't make sense, because Collar of Esses, the tech description is like the knights are now equipped with Lancaster livery. or library or whatever. Essentially, you get like a bunch of jewels. That's the thematic. Why would you get anti-armor damage if you're now wearing a bunch of jewels? It doesn't make any sense. So changed it to be that now this tech provides Lancaster Knights with armor, specifically +2 melee armor, +1 ranged armor. So this makes the Knights a lot tankier and more durable. And of course, I imagine the cost would be adjusted accordingly. So originally I wrote this as +2/+2, but then I was like, man, Knights with +2/+2 armor is kind of insane. The inspiration here was like when you're playing the English, you hit the Castle Age, you can get the super tanky men at arms that they have with the +2/+2. I think it's called the armor cladding or something like that, right? So you can think of like Lancasters as like, oh, instead of getting super tanky men at arms, they get super tanky knights. But then I was like, super tanky knights is, if you get +2/+2 on a knight, that's kind of broken. So maybe that's a little bit too much. So +2/+1 or +1/+1, that might make a lot more sense. Point is that this is a tech that really buffs up your knights, and it's so powerful that like this might be something that you actually get the landmark for. You get the King's College landmark just for this tech because it's so useful. So now I want to call out this ability right here, as size of arms. This replaces the hill training tech, which previously made hobblers train a lot faster. Now it makes yeomen train a lot faster, and it gives yeomen a little bit of movement speed. And the cool thing about this is the historical reference here. A size of arms is a very famous historical, I guess, statute or law in medieval England, where they needed a bunch of people to, how do I say this, a strong pool of talent for longbow training. They wanted a very militarized kind of like population so that they can like source recruits from for the war, the 100 Years' War with France. And so they had this law that was passed that basically like every man, able-bodied man, needs to be training every Sunday or something like that, training with their archery, training with their bows, and just like being a good archer. And this actually set up the kind of like foundation for like men in like of, how do I say this, men of Anglican origin, basically learning to train and arm themselves. That led to eventually like gun laws in America, because early American settlers kind of had this expectation of like defending themselves with their own ability to fight and everything. So it's really interesting kind of like historical, very impactful historical law that I think really deserves a shout out for this particular civilization. So now let's just talk about yeomen. So yeomen are a big issue in the game right now. BC said they're probably one of the most broken units in the game. I have to agree with that. There is so many issues with this unit. The biggest issue is that they have good damage at 5 damage. That's the same as any other archer. They have really high movement speed, just a little bit slower than the Yumi. Actually, only 5% slower than the Yumi. And they have really, really long range, the same range as a longbow. So the high range and high movement speed essentially means that they can kite you indefinitely, because they can shoot you from so far away and then run away and then keep on kiting. So the thing is, however, I wanted to keep that identity, because that seemed to be this unit's like biggest identifiers, that they can kite you from really far. And they're almost like, I think of it as almost like rangers or something like that, where they're like kind of like sniping at you from a distance, and then they run off, scurry off before you can hit them back. I think that identity does make sense as an archetype for an archer in this game. It is very powerful though. So it's okay to in AoE 4 to have a very powerful central unit that could be like, well, where a lot of the balance of this civ kind of is like focused on. But there needs to be some kind of counterplay, or at least some kind of trade-off. In this case, what I'm doing with the yeomen is that they're going to have a very reduced attack and health stats. So their health and attack will now be the same as the Yumi. So that means their attack goes down by 20%, down to 4, and their health goes down, I don't know how many, I think there's like 7% or something like that. But their health also goes down a little bit. So they're now one of the weakest archers health-wise, and they have one of the lowest attacks for archers. You could even nerf this health even further if you want. So the point is, like, yeomen are able to kite you from a very long distance, but they don't attack very hard, so you need a really large mass of them to really make an impact. And their reduced health means that if you do get on top of them, they die like paper, basically. I'm also keeping the cost at 45. I don't want this unit to be identified as like a super expensive archer to make up for the trade-offs. That just seems like not a strong identity, I guess. Like, this is like a really OP archer, but it also like is really expensive. I feel like the Order of the Dragon kind of already takes up that identity, so I don't want to like go into that territory. Hopefully, with these changes, and I'm sure there's like some additional number tweaking here, but the goal with the yeoman is to keep it at a strong identity, a strong unique archer identity, while not making it too oppressive and having some kind of trade-off that you can play around as an opponent. Additionally, synchronized shot. This was the other thing that like made it really, really powerful. Is basically turned your archers into their own mangonels, of course. So now it takes significant wind-up time, and there's an audio cue that will alert the opponent immediately. So instead of like being like a mangonel shot that you shoot in the middle of the fight, and it always sucks if as an opponent, if you like look away for just a second, all of a sudden like all your units died because you weren't paying attention to where the yeomen were synchronized shotting. That feels terrible. I think instead, if the synchronized shot was kind of used as like a early game skirmishing kind of ability, where they can kite back and then like they shoot the synchronized shot, but there's like significant wind up time so that opponents have the opportunity to dodge the shot. That makes a lot more sense and feels a lot more fair to me. Like there should be some kind of cue, and you should be thinking, oh shit, I need to go look back at the fight and like figure out where to dodge. That would be a lot more fair as an opponent. Talking about the other infantry unit here is the Earl's Guard. So Earl's Guard are a very weird unit. If you look at the stats, actually, and I don't know how many of you guys actually know this, because I didn't know this until I actually looked into the stats to do the rework. Initially, I thought, Earl's Guard, they're like probably like a stronger men-at-arms. Maybe they're more like the HRE men-at-arms or something like that. Turns out they're not. Turns out they have almost the exact same stats as a regular men-at-arms. They don't have bonus against armor, even though they have this like giant warhammer thing. They actually don't have any bonus damage against armor. They have the same exact attack as armor. The only difference between an Earl's Guard and a regular man-at-arms is that they have a slightly faster movement speed, but still not as fast as the Palace Guard. And they have the throwing dagger ability, which is, by the way, on a side note, the throwing like men-at-arms that throw daggers before they charge just makes so little sense historically. I don't know why the hell they added that. It's such a weird thing to do. But sure, whatever. So now the Earl's Guard are treated as a very different kind of unit. I wanted to give them a stronger identity compared to what they have currently in game. Currently in game, they have the same exact attack as regular men-at-arms, so their visuals are very deceiving. They have this giant warhammer, but they have the same attack as like a guy with a sword and shield. They have the same stats as a guy with a sword and shield, same health, same armor, same everything. So how do we make this a little more interesting? Well, one thing that the devs were trying to do was have that House Unified buff, where it's like you get +1 damage per standing keep for your Earl's Guards. But like realistically, like who's keeping track of that? And like let's say you have 2 keeps on the field, you get like +2 damage. It doesn't feel super impactful. So instead of doing all that, and like there's very little gameplay to be had there anyways, I'm just going to directly change the Earl Guard stats to now have a higher base attack. So they have a base attack of 16, which is very high for man-at-arms, which means that the Warhammer also signifies a little bit of something, because higher base attack means better damage versus armored units in AoE 4, so that makes a lot more sense. Now they also have a lower health, so because they're not carrying their shield, they're not as tanky and durable as other men-at-arms. They keep their fast movement speed, so now their identity is like they're a fast-moving, hard-hitting, but low durability men-at-arms, which almost kind of fits in with the Palace Guard, except for the Palace Guard makes up for its lower armor with higher health. So even Palace Guards are going to be higher durability than this. Palace Guards also don't deal as much damage as this, though. So it's almost like occupying a similar space to a Palace Guard. You can think of it as like that. And then I just want to mention here, daggers feel very random. No earthly clue why the devs added bouncing daggers, but I have no gameplay reasons to be against them, so I'm not going to touch the dagger thing. All right. Cool. So that should cover all of the units here. Let's talk about landmarks. So the first thing I want to mention here is the Abbey of Kings. So this is going to be really interesting. I'm changing it because I moved the Lord of Lancaster over to the Wingard Palace. So Abbey of Kings is going to function very differently now. It will now function as a stables. So it will continue to do the AoE healing thing, but it'll function as a stables. And the reason why I'm doing this is because Demi-Lancers are now a much more interesting unit. Because they're kind of like a high charger damage kind of horseman, you essentially get to to build a stables and immediately start pumping out demi lancers. In a way, this will almost feel like a poor man's France, but I think this will lead to some really interesting gameplay. Like demi lancers can't heal on the field, but you can like charge in, deal some damage, and then run them back to the landmark, and then heal them up at home, and then go back out to do another charge. That'll be make for some really interesting gameplay, I think. The other thing I want to add here is that maybe the first time you train the Abbey of Kings, just to balance it a little bit, you automatically get a small number of Hobbelars on completion, just because maybe a stables that heals by itself might not be attractive enough of a landmark. No strong opinion on that. But the main identity of this landmark now is like, I'm going to be producing Demi Lancers in the Feudal Age, raiding, and then healing my Demi Lancers up after they lose some health. I think this will make it a lot more interesting, because the current Lords of Lancaster, Abbey of Kings, just like, it just feels really scattered, and like there's no like synergy necessarily. I have little reason to want to build Lords of Lancaster that early in the game. The plus 5% health doesn't do too much when all have our trash units. They have low percentage health anyways, so yeah, it doesn't make a super ton of sense. All right, now next up is the Lancaster Castle. The influence system is now removed, so I mentioned that earlier. I'm taking away the influence system and giving it to the Manors instead. And then the Lancaster Castle now essentially functions as a tower landmark, so it provides garrison and it can be upgraded with emplacements. It still has the shipment mechanic, just as before. You can call in these like different batches of units, except the only difference is now, instead of demi lancers, there are Hobbelars in those shipments, because Hobbelars are now the shipment type of cavalry unit for the Civ. Just I didn't want to change too much with this particular design. I'm sure there's still problems with this kind of design, but I didn't want to have strong opinions on it in particular. Next up is King's College. King's College is going to function and stay pretty much the same. I wanted to touch it as little as possible, but the main things are some of the text that change. So hill training is removed, and a size of arms is added. Collar of S's is now buffing up knights armor, and then the Warwolf Trebuchet tech is now removed, so that there is now a Warwolf unit in the Wingard Palace. Pretty straightforward otherwise. White Tower. A lot of people were complaining the White Tower doesn't feel strong enough right now, and I think I agree with that. It's not really a good option compared to the King's College, and because for the English, the White Tower is a double production structure for every single unit in the game, for every single unit in their roster. So that was very, very powerful. And White Tower now basically just functions as a keep. So now I'm changing it to make it so that House Unified has a stronger aura with the White Tower. It now improves it from plus 5 bonus health to plus 7 bonus health per keep. And you also raise the maximum to plus 35. So this makes it a very powerful, durable, tanky landmark that can help secure your kind of castle age turtle strategy, essentially. That's the way I'm thinking about it now. The keep that previously augmented the bonus to the House Unified was Berkshire, and I kind of moved it over to the White Tower because the White Tower kind of needs a little bit more to it, whereas by the time you get to the Berkshire, you don't really need that House Unified aura at all anyways. Berkshire will now basically function the same. It's a really strong landmark already. The only difference is that the House Unified will have a additional max range. So previously it increased the max damage of House Unified to plus 6. Now it just has a higher range aura from the Berkshire. That's all. So keeping it pretty simple. So instead of maybe at this range, maybe it emanates out to this range or something like that. And the Wingard, you guys already heard a lot of my changes here. It has new battalions, Warwolf, Lords of Lancaster, Hobbelars, and Rebaldaquins. Cool. So that is it. And all this stuff is available on the Reddit post. I'll link that in the description below. I'll also link the PDF for all these, so that way you guys can read them if you're interested. I left some more detail and flavor in some of these messages. But hopefully you guys kind of get a sense of how I'm imagining the House of Lancaster. Just to kind of summarize, the main points here are: 1, Manors need to be more engaging, so that way opponents can potentially raid them and interact with them. So this means there's more risk reward for the Manors. You either place them out further out on the map where they're generating free resources for you, but they're a little bit more risky to place out on the map. or you have to you have to like start out with a manor and then you kind of build out around it so that it gets tankier over time rather than just simply like immediately getting tanky from just like placing it down next to this landmark, that kind of thing. For the House Unified, it needs to be an aura where there's now more interaction potential between the player and the opponent, and flat health I think synergizes really well with this civ's identity of like lower quality, lower health units. And it makes for some more interesting gameplay, I think, especially when you get the Lords of Lancaster out and you can kind of like go on take your health benefit and go on the offensive, that kind of thing. And then finally, the units wise, Demi-Lancers and Hobilars being kind of swapped. Demi-Lancers being like the new kind of horsemen, and Hobilars being like a raider kind of cavalry in the feudal age. Yeomen being significantly balanced out, where they get some nerfs so that they have like more distinct weaknesses and they can keep their existing strengths. Earl's Guard similarly having a stronger identity rather than just being kind of like a man-at-arms that doesn't look like a man-at-arms. And then adding this like Warwolf unit that I think will be really fun, and having like a single unique unit I think will be a lot more fun than having just like your existing trebuchets just be a little bigger. And yeah, and then of course landmarks also changing as a result of that. I think with these changes, House of Lancaster will play a little bit differently than what it plays today, but it will keep kind of the same thematics that the devs try to introduce with the Civ, but I think also be a lot more fair, dynamic, and interactive. That's kind of my goal with all this. And I want to emphasize again, none of this is commenting on the balance. I imagine the numbers will have to be tweaked as a result of these changes. And I also realistically don't imagine that the devs would actually implement all these changes in the game. These are just some of my ideas for how I would redesign the House of Lancaster. The thing I'm really interested in hearing, though, is how would you guys redesign House of Lancaster? What are your thoughts on what should be done? I know some people have a more minimalistic palette. They want to only, tweak the numbers for the manors and call it a day. I think some other folks want even more drastic redesigns that completely change how Lancaster work. Hopefully I found a happy medium that still introduces some interesting gameplay elements that maybe you guys might find a little bit more fun. Anyways, that's all for me for now. Thank you for listening to this very long video. I'm losing my voice. This has been a fun exercise to kind of discuss over. And yeah, let me know your comments let me know your thoughts in the comments below. All right, that's all for me. Stay frosty, guys. Stay chilly.